Sarah Haptonstall, step away from the medication cart.
Whoa, we don't need to make this a scene in here.
Sarah Haptonstall operated without oversight for nearly a decade as a licensed nurse in Iowa. Dozens of elderly residents depended on her. Not one person checked.
The pill cart audit's going back 6 months.
No, that's not what happened. Those were Tylenol arthritis tablets from a separate order. I'd be happy to walk
90-year-old
you.
resident in room 14. The signed administration.
The records told the whole story. A nursing chart from a Sergeant Bluff care facility signed in her own handwriting, page after page documenting hydrocodone administrations that had never happened. The pill cards in the medication cart told a different story. The toxicology told a different story. The pain level notes written by the next shift told a different story. By the time federal agents finished cross-referencing the chart against the controlled substance audit, the Iowa nurse leaning against this Ford pickup had already lost her license, already buried a hospice patient, and already broken into the apartments of elderly customers she had once delivered medication to. 42 months federal prison, 3 years supervised release. The career was over before the first deputy ever turned the lights on her. I need to be honest with you before we go any further. This one is hard. The hardest detail in this case is what happened to a 90-year-old woman in a Sergeant Bluff nursing home, and I am not going to soften it for you. If you can stick with it to the end, leave a comment for her. Subscribe if you believe these stories deserve an audience. We do not look away from cases like this. They do not get the coverage they should, and the people on the other end of them deserved better than the systems that failed them. Sarah Marie Haptonstall was born in October of 1977 in Monona County, Iowa, in a stretch of the state where the corn rows run straight to the horizon, and the closest hospital is 45 minutes away by car. Onawa sits in the flat farmland between the Missouri River and the Loess Hills, a town of around 2,800 people with a single grocery store, a single dentist, 2 churches that mattered, and a pharmacy on Iowa Avenue that had been on the same corner since before she was born. Her father worked construction across the western Iowa highway corridor, swinging hammers on bridge projects and school additions in towns like Mapleton and Whiting and Sloan. Her mother worked the kind of jobs small Midwestern towns offer women in the late 70s. Clerical at the county courthouse, then part-time at a nursing home in Mapleton, then back to the courthouse when the nursing home cut hours. Sarah grew up on the edge of town in a single-story house with a detached garage and a long gravel driveway. By the time she was 8, she could ride a bike into town to pick up a prescription for her grandmother, and the pharmacist on Iowa Avenue knew her name when she walked in. That detail matters. The pharmacist on Iowa Avenue knew her name. 30 years later, when Sarah Haptonstall stood inside that same pharmacy in a delivery driver's uniform, the owner would shake her hand and not run a background check on her, because in Onawa, Iowa, you did not have to. You already knew. That was the trust framework of the entire town. That was the trust framework she would eventually take apart, piece by piece, prescription bottle by prescription bottle. She attended West Monona Junior-Senior High School and graduated in 1996. The yearbook photographs show a thin, soft-faced teenager with a center part and a closed-mouth smile and a Future Homemakers of America pin on her sweater. She was not a star student, and she was not a problem. Teachers remembered her as quiet, polite, the kind of girl who would offer to help clean up after the homecoming dance without being asked. Her senior year, she worked weekends at a feed and farm supply store in Onawa, ringing up bags of chicken scratch and quarts of motor oil for old men in seed caps. After high school, she enrolled in a licensed practical nursing program at Western Iowa Tech Community College in Sioux City. The drive was an hour each way down Highway 75. She finished her LPN coursework in 1998, and her first clinical rotations were at a long-term care facility on the south side of Sioux City. The kind of facility that runs 3 halls of geriatric patients with a charge nurse, pulling double shifts, and a med cart that gets rolled from room to room on squeaky wheels. She was 20 years old. She wore powder blue scrubs, a white plastic ID badge clipped to her collar, and a pair of white tennis shoes she replaced every 6 months. Her first clinical instructor wrote in her evaluation that Sarah was attentive with elderly patients, gentle in her bedside manner, and demonstrated patience during medication administration. Another instructor described her as compassionate, soft-spoken, particularly suited to long-term care work. She passed her boards on the first attempt. The Iowa Board of Nursing issued her a license in the summer of 1998, a few weeks before her 21st birthday. She married young, a local man from Mapleton, an HVAC tech with his own truck and a season pass to the Iowa State Fair. They had a daughter in 2002. She worked through her 20s at 3 different nursing homes in western Iowa, picked up shifts at a home health agency that drove nurses out to farmhouses across Woodbury and Monona counties, and was, by every account, a decent nurse. Co-workers remembered her bringing extra sandwiches when someone forgot lunch. They remembered her staying past shift to sit with a confused patient until family arrived. They remembered her quoting prices on hydrocodone and Vicodin only later, after everything came out. And even then, they argued about whether they had really imagined it or whether they had heard the words and chosen not to register them. The first crack appeared in 2014. Sarah was 36 years old, working for a home health care agency that contracted with private patients across northwestern Iowa. The Iowa Board of Nursing's investigators received a complaint that she had called in a prescription for hydrocodone for a patient she did not have an active treatment relationship with, and that the prescription had been filled in her own name. The investigation moved fast. She had misrepresented herself to the prescribing physician. She had obtained the controlled substance for her own use. She pleaded guilty in district court to obtaining a prescription drug by fraud. The judge granted a deferred judgment, 3 years probation. The Iowa Board of Nursing did not revoke her license. They placed it on probation. She kept working as a nurse. That decision, the decision by the Iowa Board of Nursing to let a licensed nurse with a controlled substance fraud conviction continue practicing, is the first failure in this case. It is the seed of everything that follows. She would remain a licensed nurse in the state of Iowa for another 9 years. 9 more years of access to controlled substance pill cards. 9 more years of access to elderly patients who could not advocate for themselves. By 2018, her marriage had ended. She was 40, raising a teenage daughter, working pickup shifts at 2 facilities, and bouncing through a series of low-wage jobs in Onawa whenever nursing hours dried up. Her name appeared on a small claims docket in 2019 for an unpaid medical bill. She moved into a rented house on the north side of town with a fenced backyard and a Ford pickup parked in the gravel drive. She kept the truck cleaner than the house. The next crack was June of 2021. The pharmacy on Iowa Avenue, Stangl Pharmacy, family-owned, the same corner pharmacy from her childhood, hired her as a delivery driver. The owner, Aaron Stangl, knew her family. He knew her by reputation. He did not perform a background check on her. He did not verify her status with the Iowa Board of Nursing. He did not require her to register as a state pharmacy support worker, which Iowa law mandated for any non-pharmacist handling prescription medication in a pharmacy setting. None of it happened. She drove a Stangl pharmacy van around Ottawa for 2 months, delivering controlled substance prescriptions to the elderly customers who could not drive to Iowa Avenue themselves. To understand what Sarah Haptonstall did, you have to understand the system she was inside of. And you have to understand that the system was not built to stop her. It was built on the assumption that licensed nurses do not steal from dying patients. A long-term care facility in Iowa, like Embassy Rehab and Care Center in Sergeant Bluff, or the second facility in Ottawa, where she also picked up shifts, runs on what is called a controlled substance pill card system. Each resident with a prescription for a Schedule II or Schedule III narcotic, hydrocodone, oxycodone, morphine, has a sealed plastic and foil pill card stored inside a locked medication cart on the wing. The cards come from a contract pharmacy already counted and labeled. 30 doses to a card. Each dose sits in its own punch-out blister, with the resident's name printed on the foil backing. When a nurse administers a pill, she punches it out of the card, gives it to the resident, and documents the time, the dose, and her initials in the resident's medication administration record. The MAR. The MAR is a legal document. In Iowa, falsifying a MAR is a felony in its own right, independent of any underlying drug theft. The pharmacy delivers a new card when the old one runs out. The old empty card is supposed to come back to the pharmacy for audit. The numbers are supposed to match. The narcotic count on the card is supposed to match the entries on the MAR. The MAR entries are supposed to match the resident's pain level. The whole chain is supposed to line up. In practice, in a 2022 Iowa rural nursing home, running short-staffed across 2 halls with 1 licensed nurse per shift, no on-site pharmacist, no real-time pill card audit, and elderly residents who cannot reliably describe their own pain levels because of dementia, terminal illness, or sedation. The system runs on trust. There is no surveillance camera over the medication cart. There is no second nurse co-signing each narcotic pull. There is no biometric lock on the pill card itself. The nurse opens the cart. The nurse opens the card. The nurse documents the dose. The nurse signs her name. And the next shift assumes the entry is true. If that nurse swaps a hydrocodone tablet for a Tylenol tablet the same size and color, nobody notices for hours. If she swaps it for a Tylenol arthritis, the color is slightly off, but in a dim resident room under a fluorescent strip light at 3 in the morning, nobody is examining the pill. The resident swallows it. The resident continues to suffer pain. The nurse documents the dose given. The shift turns over. The next nurse reads the chart and assumes the resident has been medicated. She does not pull a second dose because the chart says one was already given. The resident lies in bed and waits for relief that is not coming. That is the system. That is what Sarah Haptonstall walked into in April of 2022 with a Board of Nursing probation, a 2014 controlled substance conviction, a freshly broken marriage, and an addiction the state had been formally monitoring for 8 years without ever once revoking her right to dispense narcotics to dying people. No one was watching the cart. No one was watching her. The first documented theft happened in April of 2022. The federal investigation later established that it was not actually the first theft, but it was the first one investigators could nail down to a specific resident on a specific date with a specific pill card serial number. Embassy Rehab and Care Center in Sergeant Bluff is a 1-story brick facility off Topaz Drive. 80-some beds split between long-term care and short-term rehab. Sarah worked the evening shift. She rolled the medication cart down the East Hall around 8 in the evening, stopped at a resident's door, knocked, walked in, and pulled a hydrocodone tablet from the controlled substance pill card. She did not give it to the resident. She palmed it. She replaced the empty blister with a Tylenol tablet she had brought with her in the pocket of her scrub top. She closed the card. She rolled to the next room. At the workstation at the end of the hall, she pulled up the resident's MAR on the screen and entered the administration. Time, dose, her initials, hydrocodone, 5 milligrams, given as prescribed. She did it again at the second nursing home in Onawa. She did it again the next week. She did it again in June. She did it again in July. By August, she was working a pattern. Identify residents on hospice care or end-of-life pain management because their hydrocodone orders were the largest and the most consistent. Identify the ones who could not articulate pain. Identify the ones whose families did not visit often. Swap the pills. Document the doses. Pocket the narcotic. Drive home. The 4 victims would later be named in the federal indictment. 3 were women in their 80s and 90s at the Onawa nursing home. The 4th, the one whose case anchors the entire prosecution, was a 90-year-old woman at Embassy Rehab in Sergeant Bluff. Her chart documented a standing order for hydrocodone, 5 milligrams, every 6 hours as needed for pain control. She was on hospice. She had a terminal diagnosis. She had a family. She had hours left, not days. On a shift in the autumn of 2022, the federal filings keep the exact date sealed to protect the family. Sarah Haptonstall walked into that 90-year-old woman's room with the medication cart, pulled a hydrocodone tablet from her pill card, palmed it, replaced it with a Tylenol tablet, signed the MAR, and walked out. The woman experienced severe breakthrough pain over the next several hours. The next shift's notes describe a patient moaning, grimacing, restless, unable to be settled. The chart showed she had received her hydrocodone. The chart was a lie. The woman died in pain. She died in pain because the licensed nurse who had been entrusted with the controlled substance pill card had stolen the pill she needed and then falsified the legal medical record to cover it. That is the smoking gun. There is no defense to a falsified medication administration record on a hospice patient. The MAR entry is in Haptonstall's signed nursing handwriting. The pill card audit conducted months later showed Tylenol tablets sitting in the punch-out slots labeled hydrocodone. The dying patient's pain level notes from the next shift showed what the substitution did to her in real time. 3 independent documents, 3 independent records, 1 conclusion. Phase 2 was the pharmacy. While she was stealing pills from nursing home residents, she had also been making Stangl Pharmacy deliveries. In August of 2021, a customer in Onawa called the pharmacy because his hydrocodone prescription was short. Aaron Stangl pulled the delivery log. He saw Sarah Haptonstall's name on the route. He counted the bottle. The bottle was short. The missing tablets had been replaced with Tylenol tablets pressed into the prescription bottle to make the count look right by weight. Stangl confronted her in the office on Iowa Avenue. She did not deny it. She resigned that afternoon. Stangl did not call the police. The state regulators did not find out about that incident for over a year. In February of 2023, the state finally caught up to her on the nursing home thefts. She was convicted in Iowa State Court of felony drug diversion. She received a 10-year, fully suspended sentence and probation. She surrendered her nursing license. She had been a licensed nurse in the state of Iowa for 25 years, and she had been convicted of stealing controlled substances twice. And the system finally, in February of 2023, took her license away. It did not stop her. Phase 3 started while she was on probation. In Onawa, she had taken a job as the bookkeeper for a family-owned small business. The owners trusted her because they knew her family. They gave her the company checkbook. Over a period of weeks in early 2023, she wrote checks to herself, drawn on the company's operating account, signed the owner's name to each one, and cashed them at her bank. The federal indictment would later document the embezzlement at over $8,000. She used the money the same way she used the pills. It went into the addiction. Phase 4 was the worst. 19 months after Aaron Stengel had walked her out of the pharmacy on Iowa Avenue, Sarah Haptonstall returned to her own memory of the delivery routes. She still knew which houses in Ottawa got hydrocodone. She still knew which apartments got oxycodone. She still knew the street names, the buzzer codes, the back doors that did not lock right, the screened porches that opened onto unsecured kitchens. In February of 2023, and again in March of 2023, she drove to the homes of Stengel Pharmacy customers she had once delivered prescriptions to, elderly customers, the same demographic she had stolen from inside the nursing home, and broke into their houses and apartments and stole their prescription pain medication. She was 45 years old. She was on state probation for the nursing home thefts. She was unemployed as a nurse, and she was breaking into elderly people's homes for hydrocodone. The case broke on March 10th, 2023, on a quiet residential street on the south side of Onawa. An elderly couple, both in their 70s, both former Stengel Pharmacy customers who had received deliveries from Haptonstall in 2010 and 21, returned home from a doctor's appointment in Sioux City to find their back door open and their medicine cabinet emptied. The husband's hydrocodone, prescribed for a herniated disc, was gone. The wife's oxycodone, prescribed after a knee replacement, was gone. 2 bottles, several weeks of supply. Nothing else in the house had been touched. Not the cash on the dresser. Not the wife's jewelry box. Not the husband's hunting rifle in the bedroom closet. Just the pills. They called the Monona County Sheriff's Office. A deputy responded within 15 minutes. He took the report. He walked the back door and noted no signs of forced entry. Somebody had walked in through an unlocked screen into a house in a town of 2,800 people where you still did not lock the back door if you were only going to be gone an hour. He asked the couple who knew their schedule. He asked who knew about the prescriptions. The wife mentioned, almost as an aside, that the woman who used to deliver from Stengel Pharmacy had brought the husband's hydrocodone refill the previous summer. The deputy wrote the name in his notebook, Sarah Haptonstall. He drove back to the sheriff's office and ran her. The records came up immediately. The 2014 prescription fraud conviction, the February 2023 state felony drug diversion conviction, currently on probation, address listed on the north side of Ottawa, vehicle registered, a Ford pickup, Iowa plates. Deputy Robert Mall of the Monona County Sheriff's Office filed a search warrant application that afternoon. The application laid out the timeline, the prior convictions, the prior employment at Stengel Pharmacy with access to delivery records, the prior thefts from elderly nursing home residents. It included a single sentence that would later be quoted in the federal sentencing memorandum, in court filings, and in the newspaper coverage of her plea. She is now targeting the elderly in order to obtain prescription narcotics. A magistrate signed the warrant. By late afternoon on March 10, 2023, deputies were sitting in unmarked vehicles on the north end of Ottawa watching for the Ford pickup. She came home around 5 in the evening. They followed her into the gravel driveway. 2 deputies approached on foot. A third pulled in behind her truck to block it. The first deputy knocked on the driver's window. She rolled it down. He told her they had a warrant. He asked her to step out of the vehicle. She did. She did not run. She did not raise her voice. She did not deny anything specific. She stood in the gravel driveway of the house she rented in Ottawa, Iowa, in the late afternoon light, and she waited. The truck cab smelled like an ashtray. On the passenger seat, in plain view, was a small black handbag. Inside the handbag, when deputies opened it, was a loaded 9mm pistol. She was a convicted felon. She was a documented unlawful user of controlled substances. She could not lawfully possess a firearm in the state of Iowa or anywhere else in the country. The handgun in the truck was now a federal charge. She was 45 years old. The case was about to go federal. Quick break before we get into the federal investigation. If this video has held your attention up to this point, that is because the story deserves to be told properly. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover accountability cases like this one every single week, and they do not get the mainstream coverage they deserve. Stick with me. We are heading into the federal side now, and the way these 5 agencies stitch the case together is worth seeing in full. The case did not stay with Monona County for long. Within days of the March 10 arrest, Deputy Mall was on the phone with the Drug Enforcement Administration field office in Sioux City. The DEA was on the phone with the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. HHS OIG was on the phone with the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General. Because some of the original Stangl Pharmacy refill paperwork had moved through the mail. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation came in to coordinate state-level evidence. 5 agencies, 1 target. The federal investigators worked backward through the records. They started with the Iowa Board of Nursing's licensing file, the 2014 fraud conviction, the probationary license, the surrender record from February of 2023. They pulled the Embassy Rehab and Care Center Medication Administration records for every month Haptonstall had worked the evening shift in 2022. They pulled the pill card serial numbers from the contract pharmacy that supplied the controlled substances to the facility. They cross-referenced the punch-out audit against the MAR entries. The mismatch was clear. Pills documented as administered. Pills not actually administered. A pattern across 4 named residents over a 6-month window. They pulled Stangl Pharmacy's delivery logs for 2021. They identified every customer Haptonstall had personally delivered hydrocodone or oxycodone to during her 2 months on the route. They cross-referenced that customer list against the Monona County burglary reports for February and March of 2023. They had matches. Multiple matches. Customers whose houses had been broken into in early 2023 were the same customers Haptonstall had once delivered medication to in mid-2021. They pulled the family-owned business's bank records. They found the fraudulent checks. Each one was signed in the owner's name in handwriting that was not the owner's handwriting. Each one had been deposited or cashed by Sarah Haptonstall. The forensic accountant who reviewed the checks documented the embezzlement at over $8,000 across multiple separate instruments written over a short window in early 2023. They pulled the federal Form 4473 from a February 2020 firearm purchase. Sarah Haptonstall had purchased 2 9mm pistols at a federally licensed firearms dealer in northwestern Iowa. On the Form 4473, she had checked the box certifying she was not an unlawful user of or addicted to a controlled substance. The 2014 prescription fraud conviction, on its own, did not make her a prohibited person under federal firearms law. But the certification on the form had to be truthful at the time it was signed. She had signed it knowing it was not truthful. That became a separate federal consideration in the charging decision. By the time the case file landed on the desk of an assistant United States attorney in the Northern District of Iowa in Sioux City, the federal government had a stack of documents that read like a flowchart of a single addict's 25-year deterioration: probation, 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 suspended sentence, felony state conviction, federal arrest. The Iowa Board of Nursing had formally monitored her for 9 years. The state of Iowa had handed her a fully suspended 10-year sentence 1 month before the final burglary on March 10th. None of it had worked. The federal indictment came down later in 2023. The confrontation in this case was not a single dramatic interview in a sheriff's interview room. It was a series of meetings between Sarah Haptonstall, her court-appointed attorney, and assistant United States attorneys in the federal courthouse in Sioux City over the course of more than a year. The federal indictment named 3 counts. Count 1, acquiring or attempting to acquire a controlled substance by misrepresentation, fraud, deception, or subterfuge, under 21 U.S.C. Section 843A.3. Count 2, possession of a firearm by a felon under 18 U.S.C. Section 922G.1. Count 3, bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1344. Each count carried significant federal exposure. Stacked, the statutory maximum exceeded 30 years. Her attorney pushed for a plea. The federal evidence was overwhelming. The medical record falsifications were paper. The pill card audits were paper. The Stangl Pharmacy delivery logs were paper. The fraudulent checks were paper. The handgun discovery was paper, with a Form 4473 in her own handwriting from 2020. There was nothing to suppress. There was nothing meaningful to contest. There was no witness to discredit, because the witnesses in this case were ledgers and pill cards and medication administration records and her own signed name. On February 24th, 2025, Sarah Haptonstall stood in the federal courthouse in Sioux City and entered a plea of guilty to all 3 counts. The judge asked her, on the record, whether she understood each charge. She answered yes. The judge asked her whether she was entering the plea voluntarily and free of coercion. She answered yes. The judge asked her whether she had stolen hydrocodone tablets from elderly nursing home residents and falsified their medical records to cover the theft. She answered yes. The judge asked her whether she had broken into the residences of Stangl Pharmacy customers in February and March of 2023 and stolen their prescription narcotics. She answered yes. The judge asked her whether she had written checks on the operating account of her employer, forged her employer's signature on those checks, and deposited the proceeds for her own use. She answered yes. The judge asked her whether she had possessed a firearm on March 10th, 2023, knowing she was a convicted felon. She paused. Her attorney leaned in. She answered yes. The plea was accepted. The case was set for sentencing. Sentencing came on July 16, 2025, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Iowa, Sioux City Division. The government's sentencing memorandum was 40-some pages long. It included victim impact statements from the families of the 4 named nursing home residents. It included a statement from the family of the 90-year-old woman who had died in pain at Embassy Rehab and Care Center in Sergeant Bluff. That statement was read into the record. The family described what they had been told in the days after their mother's death. They had been told she had been kept comfortable in her final hours. They had been told her pain medication had been administered as prescribed. They had been told the nursing staff had done everything they could. They had believed it. They had buried her believing it. They had grieved her believing it. They had not learned until federal investigators contacted them, more than a year after her funeral, that the hydrocodone in the pill card on the medication cart on the evening shifts of her final days had been replaced with Tylenol tablets. and that the nurse who had documented her pain doses had not actually been giving her pain doses at all. The family wrote that they could not stop thinking about what their mother had felt in those last hours, and what they could have done if anyone had told them the truth in time. The judge read the statement without comment. The government's memorandum also included the statement of Deputy Robert Mall, repeated verbatim from the March 2023 search warrant affidavit. She is now targeting the elderly in order to obtain prescription narcotics. The defense asked for leniency. The defense argued that Sarah Haptonstall was an addict, that her crimes were the product of a long-standing, undertreated substance use disorder, that she had cooperated with the investigation, that she had accepted responsibility, that she had no prior history of violent offenses against any person. The defense asked the court to consider time in a residential drug treatment program in lieu of additional incarceration. The judge listened. The judge thanked counsel. The judge addressed the defendant directly. The judge said, on the record, that Sarah Haptonstall had been given more chances by the Iowa Board of Nursing, by the Iowa State Courts, and by her employers than most defendants who appeared in his courtroom ever received in a lifetime. The judge said that a 2014 conviction for obtaining controlled substances by fraud had not stopped her. The judge said that a February 2023 felony drug diversion conviction had not stopped her. The judge said that a 10-year suspended state sentence handed down 1 month before her final residential burglary had not stopped her. The judge said that the most aggravating factor in the case was not the quantity of controlled substances she had stolen and not the dollar value of the checks she had forged. The most aggravating factor was that she had falsified the medication administration record of a hospice patient on the final shifts of that patient's life, and that the patient had died in pain because of it. The judge sentenced her to 42 months in federal prison, 3.5 years, concurrent on all 3 counts. He ordered 3 years of supervised release to follow. He ordered restitution of over $8,000 to the family-owned business in Onawa. He ordered $5,000 in court-appointed counsel fees. He ordered that any future Monona County state probation violation sentence, and one was already pending against her, would run consecutively to the federal 42 months, not concurrently. She was remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals Service in the courtroom. She did not speak when the marshals approached her. She did not look at the family in the gallery. She placed her hands behind her back and waited for the cuffs. Sarah Haptonstall is currently designated to a federal correctional institution within the Bureau of Prisons Women's Facility System. With good time credit, she will be released sometime in 2028. She will be 51 years old when she walks out. The Iowa Board of Nursing will not reissue her license. She will not be permitted to handle controlled substances in any setting for the rest of her working life. The pharmacy on Iowa Avenue in Onawa is still there. Aaron Stangl still owns it. The 4 nursing home families have buried their elders. The couple on the quiet residential street in Onawa, who came home on March 10, 2023, to a back door open and 2 bottles of pain medication missing. They still live in that same house. They lock the back door now. The structural failure that runs through every phase of this case is the same one: regulatory rope. The Iowa Board of Nursing put her license on probation in 2014 and let her keep practicing. Stangl Pharmacy hired her in 2021 without a background check. A state court handed her a fully suspended 10-year sentence 1 month before the final burglary. Every system in her path saw a flag and chose to keep watching instead of acting. Every system in her path gave her one more chance, and one more, and one more, until a 90-year-old woman in a Sergeant Bluff nursing home paid the bill that the regulators had been deferring for 9 years. The federal sentence is what finally stopped her. This case was hard to sit with, but the case on your screen right now is the one most people in Iowa never even heard about, and the way it ended will sit heavier than this one did. Click it.